What is up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel and Merry Christmas. So I decided to do this video today because the person we are covering today unfortunately died on Christmas Day, and I just think it fits that I should post this on Christmas. So yeah, Merry Christmas, and if you don't celebrate Christmas, happy holidays. Happy celebrating whatever you celebrate. So yeah, I grew up in a household with parents who are from two generations. My dad was born in the 50s, my mom was born in the 70s. Their music taste was very all over the place, but my mom's music is really what skyrocketed my music taste today. So I grew up with 80s and 90s music, which meant that I listened to Prince, New Kids on the Block, Backstreet Boys, but to my mom, the most important one was Wham, or more importantly was George Michael. In today's video, we're actually going to discuss the life and death of George Michael. So before we begin, George Michael's name is not George Michael. It is a Greek name that I am not at all going to try to pronounce because I'm going to butcher it. I'll put George saying it like he says it so much better than what I would ever.
Which is what?
My own real name?
Yeah.
Somebody told me you were going to try and say this, but I don't believe them, because my real name is Yorgos Kyriago Banayotou.
But George Michael was born on June 25th, 1963 in London. He actually grew up in and around London, and he had two older sisters and his parents. So he grew up with his parents and his older sisters, and he was very close to his mother. Her death later in his life actually kind of really messed him up. He grew up in and around London, like I stated, but he grew his passion for music at this time, and he genuinely loved music. So in high school, when he met Andrew Wrigley, his partner in Wham, they both found that love for music. They both found it and made Wham. So they both dropped out of high school and went on to become known as Wham. So they launched their music career early in the 80s, and they became big hits with Last Christmas, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, and Careless Whisper, which, ironic enough, my 4-year-old niece knows the Wake Me Up Before You Go Go part. And also when he says Jitterbug at the beginning, she goes Jitterboy. So yeah. So actually, very early on in their successful career as Wham, George Michael would come out to Andrew, which is his partner, and they kept it a secret because that's not anybody's business to know other than George. So Andrew stated in his 2019 memoir, George was adamant his sexuality should be kept under wraps, which created a wholly unwelcome extra level of stress for him to manage. But he feared coming out at the time of Wham America, which was their tour, it would scamper any chances he might have of competing with artists like Michael Jackson and Madonna in the States. So basically, George was so terrified that if he came out to the world at the time of their biggest American tour, he would not be able to compete with stars like Michael Jackson and Madonna, who were the biggest stars in the 80s. So in March of 1986, George Michael actually announced the end of Wham. Him and Andrew did perform one last time as Wham in a concert in London later in 1986. This attracted 72,000 fans, and the next year in 1987, George Michael would release his first solo album titled Faith. This album sold over 25 million copies and catapulted George Michael into a successful solo career after Wham. This album also gave him his first Grammy Award for a duet with Aretha Franklin, and that is just astonishing. Just because he did really good, sold millions and millions of copies, and won a Grammy, doesn't mean that he didn't have controversy with the album. He had a lot of controversy with his song, I Want Your Sex. Some radio stations here in the United States actually refused to play it because of its explicit content, while some radio stations actually played it very late at night for the same reasons. I can only imagine what people were doing, hearing I Want Your Sex by George Michael at 11 o'clock at night. He actually had a second solo album just a couple years later. It was Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1, and this included the song Freedom 90. So George didn't actually star in this music video, but instead featured models like Naomi Campbell, Christy Turlington, and Cindy Crawford. So while this album actually received really good reviews and sold very well, it only sold 1 million copies worldwide, which is like 1/24 of what he sold for Faith. But at this time, George actually came into a legal battle with his record company, Sony. He felt that Sony had not done everything they could to promote his album. He felt that they did him wrong, they did him dirty, and they should have focused on promoting it better. And he actually wanted to end his record contract with them. This conflict would drag on for several years, and George Michael would not be the only Sony contracted person to go against Sony and went out of the contract. We know of Michael Jackson, he was very vocal about it. Mariah Carey, there are tons of other people who worked for Sony who wanted out, and George Michael was just one of them. And during the time that this legal battle was going on, George actually only recorded and released a few singles. So in 1991, he reprised Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. It was a duet with John Elton for Charity. It became a #1 hit, with the proceeds going to London Lighthouse, which was a AIDS hospice care center, and the Rainbow Trust Children's Charity. Later, in 1991, George hit the charts once again with Too Funky, a track that was featured on Red Hot and Dance, which was an AIDS charity album. If you haven't heard Too Funky, ironic enough, it's actually trending right now on TikTok. The sound, I am not trying to seduce you. Do you want me to seduce you? Is the beginning to Too Funky by George Michael. It's also at the very end of the song. I didn't know it was George Michael until like 5 days ago, so yeah. 5 years after Too Funky, he released his next album without Sony in 1996. This album was called Older, which I think was actually remastered in the early 2000s. I can't remember. So on the album are 2 tracks, Jesus to a Child and Fast Love. These broke out on the top 10s in the United States, as did Older, the album. But still, the sales for Older were like pale in comparison to Faith. Like, Faith had sold 25 million copies, whereas his second and Older barely are selling. But a lot of people do say his decline was because he was away from the pop scene for so long, you know, dealing with Sony and basically just kind of keeping his life under wraps. Though he did win a few awards that year for that album. He took home the award for Best British Male at the Brit Awards and the MTV Europe Awards that year. But just a couple of years later, after his release of Older, George Michael was in the headlines once again for something you probably wouldn't have expected from the lead singer of Wham and George Michael.
1998 at approximately 16:48 hours, that's 4:48 p.m., Beverly Hills police officers arrested the singer known as George Michaels. Mr. Michaels was arrested for a violation of 647A of the Penal Code, engaging in a lewd act.
He actually was in the headlines because he had been arrested for lewd conduct in a male bathroom. So after this, George did actually make a televised appearance. He talked about it, and he stated very quickly that what the media was putting out there was not at all what happened. He stated that he went into a bathroom here in America, and at the time, America was very big on trying to get gay men and out them for that, because apparently America doesn't like gay people. He walked into the bathroom to use the bathroom, and this undercover cop walked up to him with his genitalia out and was basically swinging it around, from what George said. And George said all he did was smile at the man, and next thing he knew, he was getting arrested.
Editing Sarah here. I'm editing this 2 days before it's going up. Do want to say really quick, from what my mom has told me since I filmed this video, is George Michael has stated that the man walked up to him with his penis out, George smiled, and George turned around and showed his penis as well. But yeah, that's the story now. George Michael also showed his penis, which resulted in his arrest, though I do think it was a little odd that the cop walked up first. Just thought I'd let you guys know.
Which shows you right then and there that America's not the best place. But he did acknowledge the fact that he was actually gay. He said he was gay. He came out as gay. And for a while, it had been rumored about his sexuality. There was an interview in the late 80s where he talks about meeting Boy George, and Boy George was like, "Oh my God, you are too straight. You must be gay." And then the interview kind of just looks at George and goes, "Well, are you gay?" And he's like, "No." But if Boy George knew in the 80s, I think it was pretty obvious to everybody else. After his incident here in America, he actually had another effort in the music part of the business with a collection of covers, and it was titled Songs from the Last Century in 1999. While it received some positive reviews, album sales lagged, and this is actually his lowest charting album in the United Kingdom. And over the next few years, and like earlier in the 90s, George only recorded a few singles and released them. He actually did a 2000 duet with Whitney Houston on If I Told You That. In 2004, George actually released his fourth solo album, Patience. And instead of the pop charts, he found success on the dance charts. Flawless and Amazing both scored well with dance music fans. And I don't know. No, this is not the album that Freak is on. So after Patience came out, George actually made numerous comments about actually retiring from the music business, probably because his last few albums had tanked and he was received very negatively in the media. But that would prove very short-lived, that rumor, because in 2005, he released a documentary about his life and career titled A Different Story. Well, George, thanks for making sure that you didn't retire. So in February of 2006, George Michael actually had another encounter with the law enforcement, though this time I do not believe it was in America. Oh yeah, it was in London, and he was arrested of suspicion of having illegal substances on him. And according to a report in the Rolling Stone magazine, the singer in a statement that it's my own stupid fault as usual. And just a few months after this encounter with the law, he announced he was going on tour for the first time in 15 years. You heard me right. George Michael has not been on tour in 15 years. I think the last time he was on tour was for Faith, his first solo album. And then he also released a collection of his songs titled 25 in the United Kingdom. 2008, George Michael resurrected his career here in the United States. And he made several appearances, released 25 here in the States, and guest starred in the television series Eli Stone. And what's really funny is I saw clips from it on TikTok when I looked at George Michael edits. I looked at George Michael edits when I was filming this, or like researching for this video. He was a musical guardian angel of sorts, which makes sense. And the show even featured some of his classic hits. And he actually went on to perform on the finale of the series finale of American Idol before he started a national tour that summer. In April of 2011, as a gift to Prince William and wait, that's not their name anymore, is it Duke and Duchess? Kate and William, King Charles's oldest son and his wife, as a gift to them, George released a cover of Stevie Wonder's 1972 song, You and I. That was a wedding gift to them. Could you imagine? My mother would have cried if George Michael had given her a wedding gift. In August of that same year, he began performing as part of his symphonic tour, which was actually cut short because he fell ill with pneumonia. The following year, he performed Freedom 90 and White Light at the closing ceremony of the 2012 Summer Olympic Games, which were held in London. May of 2013, 49-year-old George Michael was airlifted to a medical facility in London, England, after being involved in an accident on the M1 motorway near St. Albans. He was reportedly found by the scene by paramedics and was not seriously injured, so I'm not entirely sure why he was airlifted, or if he was airlifted because he was a celebrity. I'm not entirely sure. So, very much like I said earlier in the video, George Michael kept his life very private. There had been a couple women in the past he'd been very open with. He had a couple girlfriends. He went on a date with Brooke Shields. Brooke Shields talked about that in somewhere. But George only had 2 actual partners in his life. I do believe at the time that he was outed as gay, he was already with this man, and this man was Kenny Goss, and they had actually been together for 13 years before it ended in 2009. Later in that same year, George entered another relationship with celebrity hairstylist Fadi Fawaz. I have no idea how to pronounce this man's last name. And Fadi and George actually be together until George's untimely death in 2016. So on December 25th, 2016, at the age of 53, George Michael was found unresponsive by Fadi in his home in Oxfordshire. So at the time of his death, he was actually working on a documentary titled Freedom. And this documentary was actually released in 2017. And there is another documentary that was released this year, I do believe. I'll have to check to make sure that, because I know that my mom was really, or like early this year, she was like, oh my, there's a George Michael documentary coming out, and I really want to watch it. But now that she's watched it, I feel like I need to watch these because I feel like I need to know him a little bit better. You know what I mean? So, an autopsy later revealed that he died from natural causes related to the heart and liver. A lot of people speculated it was because of the drugs and the alcohol that he had. And from the video I seen, George Michael's last performance ever was the day before he passed away. Like the night he passed away on Christmas Eve. And from the video, you can see he's swollen. I had an uncle pass away a few years ago who had issues with his liver and had gained a lot of weight because of water, and he was very bloated. It most likely was liver issues with George. So actually, following George Michael's death, many charities and many people came out and stated that he would donate money to charities anonymously. He often donated his time to these places as well, donated hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars to places. He would volunteer at homeless shelters and keep his name out of the public, which is so sad. He paid for a woman's fertility treatments, and then he tipped a waitress thousands of dollars to help her pay for her nursing school debts, which is astonishing because the media will never say those things to you, will never give those to you. He also anonymously gave millions of dollars to certain charities, one of which was Childline. It was a counseling service for children in the UK. I did state earlier that him and his mom were very close, and I forgot to put it in, so let me real quick put this in. George Michael's mother died in 1997, and he has stated numerous times that his mother's death really broke his heart. His mother died in 1997, and they were very close, and that kind of really brought him down. He was very vulnerable when he was outed in 1998. And sadly, George Michael's estate was given to his sisters, his dad and his sisters, and godchildren he had received from his numerous celebrity friends. And I'm gonna be honest with you right now, it's sad to say this. He gave it all to family and friends and godchildren. And Fadi, his partner at the end of his life, thought that everything should have went to him because he was with George at the very end of his life. And he even sued for it, and the family won in the instance. Fadi was given nothing other than a humiliated conscience because George Michael was dead. Why were you trying to take that away from his family? But sadly, 3 years to the date of George Michael's death, his older sister passed away. But I cannot imagine losing 2 children exactly 3 years apart on Christmas Day. So yeah. I do know that him and his sister are buried with their mother, which is very sweet. And you can visit their graves, and you can stream his music. You can make him so much better than he was when he was alive. Go watch his documentaries. Go watch his interviews. Go watch him say his actual birth name, because I will never be able to do that. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next year. My first video of the year is Chris Farley, I will say that, and I think you guys will like it, because I have had to refilm this video, and I had to refilm that. I'm gonna have to refilm that one, so yeah. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next year. Have a safe New Year's, holidays, whatever, and I'll see you beginning of January. Bye.